The Souls series is very infamous for their difficulty, but I don't think that is the main reason why it's so popular. I think together with the combat system and how it forces you to do many small decisions while playing, the games just feel very rewarding. And I've realized this more recently whenever I wanted to play the Final Fantasy VII remake. I grew up playing Final Fantasy, so I was really hyped to finally trying it out. And even though this should be a game that on paper ticks all my boxes, I refunded it pretty early because the combat just was not necessarily boring, but it just was unrewarding to me. So I've been thinking why franchises like Monster Hunter or the Souls series feel so different, even though the combat most of the time feels a lot slower. And I think it has a lot to do with the games forcing you to make many small decisions while playing. For example, resource management. Even though this is something that also exists in other games, I think the way these games do it, it forces you to think about what you want to use your, for example, stamina on. You can't just endlessly attack and evade at the same time, because eventually you will run out. And because you'll eventually run out, you also have to decide on when you want to perform an action. For example, if you've just successfully evaded an attack pattern from a boss, you finally have an attack window. So what do you want to do? Do you want to attack? Do you want to heal? Maybe you panicked a little and evaded too often, and now you don't have enough stamina left to attack. The reason why this system is so satisfying is because it rewards good decision making. If you learn an attack pattern from a boss and you can minimize the amount of stamina you use, you can be a lot more aggressive. And even though you have gameplay mechanics like parrying or evading, sometimes just standing in the position where the boss doesn't hit you and you didn't use any stamina at all feels really good. And this also enables a learning curve that is somewhat similar to MOBA or fighting games, where you basically learn the moveset of your weapon, and once you've gotten good enough at it, you basically just have to adapt to your enemies. And another very rewarding transition is going from thinking that you can't beat the boss because he just whoops your ass, to finally defeating it, even if it takes many tries. And it's not just the Souls series that does this very well, this slow and decision-heavy combat. We even have this in survival games or in ARPGs like Valheim and No Rest for the Wicked. So this isn't something exclusive to the Souls franchise. So what is so different in other games, or specifically RPGs? Because I think that is the game genre that can be compared best to the Souls franchise. Usually the combat is a lot more fast-paced, so in theory it should be more engaging. But to me, it doesn't feel that way. Whenever you can just spam your attacks, I think every input you do is just less impactful. I've also realized that mistakes aren't as heavily punished, and probably depending on the person, that is something you will either love or hate. But usually you can do a lot of mistakes and correct them every time. And if I realize that I don't really have to pay attention or don't really have to avoid attacks, usually I won't. I will just go into autopilot pretty fast, because a horse only jumps as high as it needs. And there are many great games that I would really love getting into, but the combat just threw me off a bit. I think the most controversial one would be Witcher 3, because that is a game that many people regard as one of the best. From setting and music and lore, that is definitely a game that I should enjoy. Other examples are basically Final Fantasy VII Remake or also Final Fantasy XVI. I think the best case study for this is Final Fantasy XVI. It is probably the game for me that has the best story, but I don't think I will ever be able to play it again just because the combat just doesn't give very rewarding feedback. Even though the boss fights are probably the most cinematic I've ever witnessed in games in general. And there are exceptions to this rule where you have fast-paced combat, but they also implemented very difficult bosses, so even though you can spam your attacks, you still have to slow down and react to what the boss is doing. And this is why it feels so good to play the Souls series or Monster Hunter. You really have to pay attention to what the enemy is doing, what resources you have left. And this is something that is missing for me in other RPGs, even though in theory those are games that I really should like. But I think in RPGs especially, you need to nail the combat, because outside of the story and the world setting, it is probably the system that you engage with the most. So I'm very curious if this is something that you guys experience as well. Maybe you enjoy both types of combat and aren't as autistic as I am. Maybe you also have some great game suggestions for me. Let me know in the comments what you think, and with that being said,
Time is money, friend.